Do you want to? Oh, there we go.
There we go, recording. Thank you.
Do you want to introduce yourself, and then I'll just say a few words before we get into the main questions.
Yeah, so for the people on the meeting who don't know me, I'm Siobhan Jones. I am an inspector in Durham Police. I am Benji's boss. There'll be some of you around the meeting that know Dave Dove. I'm also Dave's boss. I have 3 key areas of the business. One of them is cohesion, hate crime and externally focused EDI. One of them is policing the licensed economy, and the third is force lead for protest liaison.
Would you just clarify what externally focused EDI is, please?
So some of the questions that you've posed are very much about what we do in-house. So that is internally focused EDI. You've then got externally focused EDI, which focuses on communities and focuses on partners.
Now, am I correct in thinking EDI is equality and diversity issues?
It is equality, diversity, inclusivity.
Inclusivity. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, okay, if I just say a few words to start with. So first, thank you for the invitation, and we were just discussing before we started formally at 6 o'clock. I hope part of what we discuss in the next hour or so is as much for us to take away issues and themes and feedback from you based on our responses. So, you know, I want to say very early on that we're open to praise, but we're more open to issues of, I'm going to say criticism, you know, things that we could do better. So your views, I'm very open about all of that, and it's really important that
wash my hair since Friday.
Everybody put themselves on mute, please.
It's really important that you know, you feel as though you're heard, and that where we can improve and reflect and do better on behalf of everybody, really open to do that. So, you know, please don't hold back, otherwise the opportunity's wasted. I know that you work really closely with Benji, and I appreciate the email and the feedback, and I included it on my Ideal Weekly blog to all the workforce, highlighting good work and recognition. So I was really pleased to see that, and I know he works hard with you and for you.
Okay, thanks, Jo. Okay, everybody. So the ground rules are, I guess, that if we all go on mute other than Jo, I'll pitch the question. Jo will give us her answer, and then depending on what we get, we've got other linked questions, so we might want to go through them all first. And if you've got a question, jot it down or whatever, and then we'll come back after that group of answers. And if there's any questions as a result, we'll try and get them in. But as I say, I'm very keen to get the 12 questions that have been posed answered. If we've got time for supplementary, great. Okay, so let's go for the first question then. So the first group of questions is pretty much about how the police force deals with LGBT issues internally and staff issues. And the first question was, as a woman in a traditionally male-dominated environment, how do you feel protected communities are represented within ranks of the force? And what support networks are there in place supporting those officers?
Okay. So probably I'd start by talking to you about the culture of the organisation, and this is the third police force that I've worked in just coming up 30 years in September, and culturally they're all very different. And I used to work in Northumbria Police, and you'd think that the culture of two adjoining forces would be very, very similar, but they're not. They're not. And what I know around Durham Police, and I've been here since 2016, is there's a really strong, positive culture within the organisation. And you might say, well, okay, they're fancy words, but you can feel it within the organisation when you talk to people. So it's very positive. We talk around being positive. We talk about equality. We talk about inclusivity, and that's a real strong theme for me, because the way I see the organisation is if people feel included as part of the team, whether it's their small team or the bigger organisation, and that they've got a voice in the organisation, that they're listened to, that they feel as though they can bring all of themselves to work, then if they feel included within the organisation, then that goes a long way to the way they behave and the way they support members of the public. So being inclusive is a really strong theme in Durham Police. In addition to that, we have a number of strong support groups within the organisation, and they have a voice, and they shape, and they have an influence in the organisation. So, I mean, just to give you some, we have a disability group, we have LGBT support group, we have a menopause awareness group, we have a pagan society, we have a ethnic minority support group. So these support groups both support individuals, but support me as Chief Constable in shaping the organisation, in giving a view on current issues, in giving a sense of how does the organisation feel. And if you think where we've been in the last, 12, 18 months with COVID, that was really, really important, because we were only able to support communities through the pandemic if we were well ourselves. And that could be, you know, in a physical sense, but also in a psychological sense. And that has been front and centre in terms of the way we've supported each other to be able to serve the public in, you know, what none of us have ever seen or been in this situation. So those support groups are really key in shaping the organisation. And we talk about fairness as a strong value within the organisation, and we talk about openness and honesty. And you know, I would invite, you know, I'd invite feedback as to whether people think we've achieved that. But having, like I say, worked in 3 different policing organisations, you get a real sense. Get a really real sense within Durham Police. And because it's not a huge police force, it still has a, I mean, whether you call it family friendly, it has a connectivity, because it's not a huge organisation. So people feel a sense of the place and what it stands for, and the fact we're here to serve the public. I'll pause there, Andrew.
Okay, Jo, thanks. You mentioned, you answered there about support networks in place for supporting officers. The second question is very specific in terms of that support. And it is, as an openly gay man who has seen your recruitment notices of late, they wonder what support will be offered in the instances, and this is obviously if it's gone wrong, in the instance of bullying and harassment. So that's obviously the very specific support if it goes wrong for somebody within the organisation in terms of LGBT. Okay.
So if we were talking about poor behaviours, and I'm not playing that down, if somebody was subject to some abuse, we'd have to first and foremost decide, you know, does that reach a threshold for a crime? That would be something quite different. If somebody was subject to some abuse, we have a very strong grievance policy. We have a we call our leadership style supportive leadership, and we work heavily and have for a number of years, and it precedes me within the organisation with Durham University in terms of developing a style of leadership that supports our organisation, and we call it supportive leadership, and it's based on academic research. So it's not just a fanciful idea that we've come up with one day. And what it means by being supportive is knowing your staff, knowing your team, being alive to issues that might affect them and their ability to do the job. At the same point in time, having a focus on what do we need to deliver? How do we support the public? Are we delivering to a high standard? So within that supportive leadership approach, I would be confident that somebody, a supervisor, would know that something was wrong, that there was an issue that needed to be addressed. Whether we addressed it by way of a conversation, by way of something more formal around a grievance. But we've got lots of mechanisms and lots of policies to support individuals. And we would obviously seek the views of that person. And I'd be very, very disappointed if somebody was subject to that sort of behaviour with the organisation. But, you know, sometimes we recruit people that don't meet our standards, our exacting standards, and you know, they don't continue to work for us, and that's a fact of life. I don't know whether I might bring Shiv in on that. I don't know whether you want to add anything. I'll bring her in periodically, because some of the detail and some of the questions she's got that in terms of more depth.
Yeah, and I think the boss is absolutely right when she says we are not naive as an organisation. We know that within 1,200 officers and however many PCSOs and however many staff, it doesn't matter what our policies and procedures are, we will occasionally recruit somebody into the organisation who doesn't have our values at their core. And I know that everybody in the world has some form of prejudice within them. But the expectation for us as an organisation is they keep the prejudice within, and they will behave towards the public, towards each other, towards their managers, towards the people they supervise, is that they treat people fairly well and with respect. But we are not daft. We know that occasionally the wrong person gets into the organisation and they don't necessarily behave well. And in those circumstances, we have a host of policies and a host of reporting mechanisms. And so somebody can go through a thing called Integrity Link, which is a completely anonymised reporting tool. They can go to professional standards. They can go to their manager. If their manager is the problem, they can go to the manager above them. They can go to the support association. There's a host of different ways in which they can bring the support around them. And then we will do what is most appropriate, A, having regard to the circumstances, but B, also having regard to their wishes. And wherever we encounter people who don't have our values at their heart, they do leave the organisation.
Okay, thanks for that. The third question is very similar to that, so you might just need to expand rather than go into a whole new answer. It asks, what figures do you have for anti-LGBT hate crime within your ranks? And how do you propose to address these issues?
So I can respond to that. We don't have very many hate crimes perpetrated towards our staff from an LGBT perspective. We do have members of staff who are, who are Black, Asian, or some other minority ethnic group. And because they are quite visibly of a protected characteristic, they are more likely to be targeted in that way. People from the LGBT community who are part of our ranks are less likely to be targeted, but when they are, and the chief has just signed off on her statement, which is it's a bit like a business impact statement, which will accompany every case file to the CPS where a member of staff or an officer has been subject to a hate crime. So that statement will go with the case file, basically saying the significant impact of this hate crime, not just on the member of staff or the officer, but also on the team, the organisation, and on the community, and also our ability to attract people from diverse communities into our organisation to work for us. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is we have the 8-point plan, which is basically a plan where the supervisor, a manager, will basically go through the plan and make sure that they've considered the impact on the member of staff that the hate crime has had on them. They will make sure that they touch base with them regularly, because some people do tend to internalise the impact of a hate crime on them, making sure that they're referred to welfare. So again, there's a whole host of things within that wraparound care plan. We have a policy that every internal victim of hate crime, everything gets taken to court. And what we find is because officers are using body-worn video, whether that's PCSOs or frontline officers, constables, because they've got body-worn video footage of the offence taking place, it's irrefutable. So we find that we get the convictions very easily for that. But we always push for a conviction. That is our policy. We also are sitting down now with the support associations, because what we have been doing, particularly with the Black, Asian and other minority ethnic officers, is when the hate crimes come in, we've been ensuring that that's referred into DEMSA. So that is our support association for officers from ethnic minority backgrounds. And then DEMSA put a call into them to give them that additional wraparound. So we're now doing that with all the other support associations as well, so that there's that full wraparound care, because as the Chief alluded to, it does have a family feel. And if somebody within our ranks is targeted, we kind of take that personally. We really want to support them, because if we get people from minority groups into the organisation, that makes us a better organisation, but we've also got to retain them. And we won't retain them if we don't look after them when they've been a victim of crime.
Okay, the next one. How would you handle an officer's transition while working for the force? What policies are in place to support them and protect them from negative responses from colleagues and the public?
Well, this was a good prompt to us, Andrew, because in doing some preparation, we realised that we didn't have. I mean, we're as you'd expect, we're awash with policy and procedure, but we didn't have, and we hadn't formalised a policy specifically around transitioning. So, you know, I said at the beginning, we were open to feedback, and you prompted, and Shiv and I were talking about this before we came online, and I had a discussion with our HR team. So you've prompted us to get something more formal. We've got good networks across policing. So there is a wealth of knowledge, experience, advice out there. Because although we're Durham Police, policing is a very small community relatively. So, you know, we know at all levels that we can reach out to colleagues in other organisations within policing and seek advice. But I suppose it goes back to the look and feel of the organisation, and it's an inclusive one. And I'm confident that people would respect somebody who was on a journey, who was transitioning, and they would support them in the same way as they support all their colleagues. I always say to new recruits that policing is a marathon and not a sprint. And in the 35 years that they work within policing, things happen in people's professional lives that are challenging. Things happen in people's private lives that are challenging. But we have good support. We have a positive culture, and we will guide, advise, care for people as they, you know, as things happen in their lives. That they need that support on. It's very much something that, you know, like I say, things happen, people make decisions and choices, and we will support them through that, with a view to, like I say, this is a long career. This isn't something that people dip in and out of. They stay with us for many years. I said goodbye to a lady last week who'd worked for us in different support roles. So she was a police staff member. She'd worked for us for 41 years. And she'd worked with people who had since retired, and now she's seeing the children of those people she worked with coming into the organisation in different roles. So, you know, I think the fact that we've got that culture, and we've got people coming in who are the sons and daughters of people who've worked for us is a real positive thing, because it says this is an organisation that cares for individuals, it supports them, and it recognises that you know, things happen and life ebbs and flows, and sometimes we just need a literal or a metaphorical arm around us, and you know, we can do that.
Can I just add something into that as well, Andrew? And obviously
Yeah,
everybody on the group. I understand obviously this video will be shared and it will be seen by people within the community. We want people to come and work for us that have the policing values at their heart, and we know that they are a rare find, and we will find them everywhere if we look hard enough. But I totally understand that somebody with a trans history or is going through that process, they might think, I want to be a police officer, but will they treat me fairly? Will they treat me well? If they're worried about that, if they're concerned about that, please put us in touch with them or ask them if they want to come and talk to us, and we will allay their fears as best as they can. And we know it'll be a leap of faith for them, but we just want them to take that leap.
Can I just add on to the back of that? If you do develop a policy or a procedure or anything like that, and you want to bring it back to this group for us to have a look and give you some, you know, thoughts, you're absolutely, obviously we would love to do that. I've took a leap of faith there because I'm assuming everybody agrees with that, but certainly I can I've got a few nods, so I'm guessing that's a yes.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
Like I say, there's they're big organisations on one level, but it's a close network within policing. So if we don't know the answer within, we can always reach out to colleagues elsewhere. Yeah. Across, and of course the technology makes that so much easier now.
Question 5 was about how the police service deal with homophobia within the force. However, we're 25 minutes in. I'm conscious we've got a lot of questions, and I think you've probably answered that question when you've gone through the bullying and harassment and how you would deal through the discipline process. So if I can make an executive decision and say, I'll class that one as answered. If the person who asked that comes back and says, no, I want a more detailed answer, I'll ask you to maybe send us an email or something, but just to try and move a bit of time on, we'll take that one as read. So the next one goes into more into the community feel outside of the force. And the question is, do you feel there is currently enough being done within the police to support the LGBTQ community? And if so, what do you think is currently the most helpful? If there isn't anything, then what can be done to improve this?
Right. Durham Police has at its heart a strong neighbourhood policing footprint. And what I mean by that is that through, if we go back, those whose memories go back to sort of 2008, 2009, austerity hit the nation, and we had to, together with many organisations, those of you who work in the public sector, we had to make some really difficult decisions around how we would police, what the organisation would look like, and how we'd meet all the cuts that were necessary. Durham Police, and this wasn't my work, Durham Police took a really good and strong decision to maintain a strong neighbourhood policing footprint. So Benji and colleagues who are police community support officers, our neighbourhood officers, our neighbourhood sergeants and inspectors. And I think part of our ability to relate to the public, our ability to be legitimate in the eyes of the public, and that came into strong focus, didn't it, through COVID and the way in which we dealt with the COVID regulations. In order to be legitimate and have the trust of communities, you need a strong neighbourhood policing foundation. Durham Police have maintained that throughout. Others got rid of neighbourhood policing and said, oh, we don't need that, that's a luxury we can't afford. Well, actually, it's absolutely something that is essential, both in terms of those points I've made about legitimacy and trust and confidence, connecting with people, getting a sense of issues in communities, and being that visible and known face of policing. So we kept that strong base. We've developed it since. We have a small team, including Benji, around community cohesion. We've just recruited an additional group of PCSOs. So we have a disproportionate number, if you like, of PCSOs and neighbourhood officers compared with colleagues across the country. That's a really positive thing. So in response to that, if somebody's the victim of hate crime, if somebody has issues that they're concerned about and they think that behaviours are escalating, we've got that known group of people who work closely with communities and get a sense of what is going on and where people have issues around, whether they're other members of the public or concerns about another issue. So, and that obviously includes our response to hate crime. It includes our response specifically around crimes or issues that are motivated by sexual identity or gender identity. So I'm confident that we've got that and that our response is a positive one. Would I like another £10 million or £20 million? Of course I would. Of course I would, because I would invest more in cohesion. I would invest more in the roles that Benji has. But you'll know these are all fine balances and decisions, and that decision has to be weighed up against so many others. Some of those are very acute issues, and some of them are broader than that. Do I think the provision is good? I do. Do I think we need feedback from folks on the line? Absolutely. Would I like to have another £10 million? Absolutely. I mean, just to give you a sense, the budget's 125 million a year. So that just gives you I said 10 million, 20 million. It would all be welcome, gratefully welcome.
Thanks for that. I think you've probably covered most of the next question, which was understanding community outreach. So again, I'm going to make a decision to move past that one. But just as a matter of interest, Benji often says he'd be quite happy to do his job for nothing. So there's a cost saving there if you want to take that on board.
I'm sure he's going to deny that now.
I don't know what Mrs. Benji would think about that.
Well, he's on footballers' wages, so he wouldn't be bothered about a cut. Just like me, I'm on footballers' wages as well. Okay, then. So the next one will be, we know that the reporting rate for hate crime across all protected characteristics is low. Can you explain what actions are being taken by the police in order to increase reporting levels, and how do you feel this is going?
Shall I respond to that, boss?
Yeah, if you like. Yeah.
Yeah. So we obviously benchmark ourselves against the national figures, regional figures, local figures. The Crime Survey of England and Wales, which obviously compares ONS data against police recorded data, would tell us that 56% of hate crime is recorded, and therefore 44% goes unrecorded. We know that there are lots and lots of different reasons why that cohort go unrecorded. What we have done over the last 5 years, and into 5 or 6 years, as indeed many other forces have done, is we've sought to improve the way we record, improve the training of our officers so they can effectively identify hate crime. But we also go out into communities and we use forums such as this and other forums where we are reaching out to communities, and not just communities with protected characteristics, but the communities that bubble around them. So, for example, housing associations or, groups of care homes. So we educate people about what hate crime is, how to report it, what to expect from the police when you do report it, and actually what to do about it when we get it wrong. So we do an awful lot of engagement in that regard. We also do a lot of training with our officers. So the officers get specific hate crime training. The student officers all get hate crime training, but we also do refresher training with our officers who've been in the job for some time. Now that is all scenario-based training, because I'm a big believer in, if you want people to really get a message and they are operational staff, you need to give them operational scenarios. So we talk about the hate crime per se, but then we talk about those specific areas of hate crime that relate to particular communities, so that they can understand A, what it's like for that community, but B, what that particular community's barriers are to reporting, and indeed going forward to court if court is the most appropriate option. And one of the scenarios that we use is, it's a hypothetical situation of a gentleman who was on a night out with friends in Darlington on a Monday night, and he's subject of homophobic abuse. So we go through that scenario with the cops. We ask them to think about what their investigative opportunities are. And we also ask them to think about, why does this victim potentially not want to go to court? And then we talk about the very specific things that we can do to improve that or make that more likely, but also ask them to think about, well, if the victim doesn't want to go to court, how do we do the right thing by them and abide by their wishes? So we have a thing called special measures, which we train the cops on. And special measures is a way of improving people's evidence at court, improving the likelihood of them actually coming to court as a witness, because either they are intimidated, they find the whole process scary, they don't want to be face to face with the offender, lots of different reasons. Now there's three very specific special measures that are particularly good for the LGBT community. And one of those is what we call a ground rules hearing. So that is a hearing whereby the prosecution and the defence get together at a hearing ahead of the main trial and agree in front of a judge what the acceptable lines of questioning will be, and indeed what the unacceptable lines of questioning will be. So for example, they will not be allowed to say to a woman with a trans history any massively inappropriate questions about her history. And they won't be able to say to somebody, who is gay, so how long have you been gay? Ridiculous and appalling questions. They're not allowed to ask those. So that's the first one that benefits the community, and we particularly train officers on that. The second one is reporting restrictions. So there's an expectation that the circumstances of the offence that will not go into the press, or if they do, they go in a sanitized version, so the identity of the victim is not disclosed. And that is obviously particularly good for people who are not out at all, or out in some part of their life but not in others. And similarly, so giving evidence in private, which means that the whole court is cleared with the exception of those key players that simply can't be kicked out. So these are the things that we educate our staff on, and say to them, if you're going to try and encourage a member of this particular community, the LGBT community, to come to court and be a witness or a victim, then these are the things that might assist that and enable them to give their best evidence. But we also try and get them to understand that just because charging somebody and taking them to court appears to be a successful outcome, it doesn't necessarily make it the right outcome. Because some people don't want to go to court, they want an entirely different intervention.
Thanks, Shiv. Just to finish off with the last part of the question, how do you feel all this is going? Is it making a difference? Is it getting the kind of improvement you want? And accepting that you won't get another 10 million this year, is it kind of meeting your expectations of what you want from it?
Yeah, can I add a couple more points to that? What Shiv's described in detail, I would add that we want a victim, regardless of the offence, to feel as though they have control of what happens. That's really important. So as she says, down a criminal justice route might be appropriate, but there are other ways to deal with more. And when I say minor, I'm not belittling it. but there are different ways, and it might be a restorative approach, you know, where the victim would be willing to enter into what we call restorative conference, so that the perpetrator can understand the impact that they have had on that person. In addition to that, within that whole criminal justice approach, if something was down that route, we have a very proactive and what I was going to say, empathetic, that's not the right word, proactive and forward-thinking judge at Durham Crown Court. Now, you're talking about offences that are serious, but just to reassure you, we have a really productive relationship with Judge Adkin, and like I said, he's forward-thinking. He's an individual who wants to make sure that justice is done in a speedy fashion, and he's very alive to issues around vulnerability and intimidation. In addition to that, we also have a very good relationship with our local Crown Prosecution Service, the CPS. They prosecute individuals, so we have different jobs. We don't always agree with them, but again, we work really hard with the CPS, particularly in relation to very personal crimes, and these are very personal crimes, aren't they? I've targeted you because there is a difference there. This is motivated by bias and hatred. So these are personal crimes. So again, we work closely with the Crown Prosecution Service to gather the best evidence. In response to that broader question, can we do better? Of course we can, and you know, part of this discussion today is to take views from yourselves, and sometimes some of the you know, people's experiences. I need to hear that firsthand so that we can improve and always move forward.
Thanks for that. The next one, you've answered the end of it, which is how can we encourage people to come forward, which is what you've gone through. But the first part of the question was, during the pandemic, the force has seen an increase in hate crimes towards LGBT when lockdown rules were relaxed. Has the force seen an increase in domestic violence within all communities? And is there a comparison between which groups of the community are more likely or less likely to come forward to report? Does that make sense?
I'll come back to the second bit.
Do you want me to go, boss?
Yeah, so if I just talk about domestic abuse, and then Siobhan will come in. We didn't see an increase during the pandemic. In fact, it was something, you know, that we watched closely, and it remained across. I'll talk force area rather than Darlington specific. It remained fairly stable. What we did very early on in the pandemic was put in place the ability to make contact with people who we know are subject and had been subject to domestic abuse, so that we were able to reach out to them in a safe way, at a time when obviously getting help and support, and you're living with a partner who is a perpetrator, and you've got nowhere else to go. And in the same way, we did that with I mean, just to give you some context, we did that with vulnerable children and those that you know, on the radar with social services and ourselves. So that was our approach, to really reach out to people who we knew their vulnerability and their risk of being a victim was heightened by the fact that there was nowhere else to go in the pandemic. But we didn't see an increase in reporting. Like I say, it stayed fairly stable. That's not to say that there wasn't more domestic violence. I mean, we can obviously all imagine that there probably was, but you know, it was a really really challenging time. Shiv, do you want to pick up from there?
Yeah, so I was going to add in that in terms of the LGBT community, we've seen consistent numbers of incidents reported to us each year, and the numbers of reported incidents haven't changed pre or post pandemic, but we are talking about small numbers annually, and this may link to a lack of confidence in police or the wider criminal justice system. Each local authority now has a newly appointed domestic abuse commissioner, and these commissioners are currently consulting with partners in the community to identify gaps in the services for all domestic abuse victims. So the local authority has a responsibility to provide emergency accommodation for anyone suffering and fleeing from domestic abuse. And we would urge anyone who needs this service to contact the local authority or ourselves so that we can support and safeguard them. And we will facilitate a connection between the newly appointed commissioner and Arcus, as we will with all community groups. We're always keen to work with our communities to understand specific needs so they can feel safe and confident when contacting the constabulary. And we've got lots of specialist services, such as the independent domestic violence advocate. Now, they're independent from the police. And they're really, really good at engaging with victims and getting them to understand, I suppose, the landscape and the support that they can be offered. And sometimes they spend a lot of time engaging with the victim and don't necessarily get them on board for a statement this time, but they might get them on board next time. So they do a lot of work building trust. We've also got a thing called MATAC, which deals with what we would call mid-level perpetrators. They're not high risk. We're not concerned that they're necessarily going to go out and take the life of their spouse, but they come to our attention so regularly for domestic abuse and indeed other types of criminality that we have a sort of an intervention program with them. And we also have domestic abuse innovation officers who can offer additional support and engagement to anyone suffering from domestic abuse. And we will continue to monitor issues raised from this group and others, but to date we haven't had any information suggesting a spike within the community. But that's the purpose of this conversation, is for you to maybe tell us otherwise.
Okay, thanks for that. One of the questions coming up was about gaps in provision of services for domestic abuse, which you've answered, because there's the new domestic abuse coordinator who is currently, as I know, because she's been in touch with me, trying to look for those gaps. So I think we can say that that one's been answered as well.
Andrew?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
I think there's a need for more perpetrator support. I think policing and other agencies has very much focused around safeguarding victims of domestic abuse, and in order to eradicate that issue, there needs to be a greater focus on perpetrators and how to, and this might not sit very easily with everybody, and I'm not talking about a perpetrator program and there not being a criminal justice sanction. I'm talking about these things going hand in glove. But in order to address those behaviours and that criminality and violence or coercive behaviour, whatever form that takes, that needs intervention and it needs support and it needs money to change that. And you know, you can put somebody in prison many times as you want, but you've got to look at what's the underlying issue. So I would like to see more investment around that, but it's not always terribly popular. But you know, that's just a sort of professional personal view from me.
Well, I don't think it's a million miles away from the way other perpetrators are dealt with, that there is that approach, isn't there? There's the punishment side, the criminal justice side, but there's the how do we stop you doing it again side, and the support. So I don't see it being a million miles from other crimes perpetrators. So yeah. I would say I would agree with that. But in terms of hate crime, the next question is, what support is provided to members of the LGBT community who are victims of hate crime?
So I can answer that, Andrew. And the support that's provided is the same support that we would provide to all victims. We're duty bound under the Victims Code to keep victims updated as to the progress of investigations and to ensure that they have access to specialist support if they need it. Unlike the majority of crimes, with hate crime in our organisation, all the victim care is dealt with by Benji and Faye, who was the other cohesion officer, and they've been particularly good at that during the pandemic, and that's been a great way to connect with people who might otherwise have been isolated. So if necessary, and if that's what the victim wants, they also link them into VCAS and other specialist services, whatever's appropriate, having regard to the offence that's been perpetrated and the particular needs of the victim. And sometimes it's a case of a phone call, isn't it, Benji? It doesn't take a lot to make people feel supported and to get them to understand, you know, that we do support them, that there is that wraparound and that sort of arm around them. And if the engagement can stop at any point, whatever's appropriate for the victim. But sometimes Benji and Faye stay with these people all the way through a court process. And what's unique about Durham offences that get taken to court is that we have no victim attrition. So I talk about victim attrition, and that's where a victim is initially on board with the process of going to court, the concept of it. But there comes a point at whatever stage that they decide they no longer want to support the prosecution, and that's victim attrition. And we don't have that. We have got 100%, and we've also got one of the highest conviction rates as well for hate crime. And I put that down to Benji and Faye and the support that they give victims.
Okay, thanks for that, Chief. Just a quick time check. We've got 10 minutes of the scheduled time left. We've got it down to the last question. But what I'd like to do, if possible, if we answer the question within sort of 5 minutes, if we then have 5 minutes at the end, kind of summing up where we're at, and if there's any supplementary questions, and as I say, there's always a follow-up through email and stuff anyway. But the final question is, what is your stance on the bathroom debate, and how would officers be instructed to react with regard to a disturbance following a trans person using a gendered bathroom in public?
Are you going to do that one, Shiv?
Yeah, I can do, boss. So we have got two stances. We've got the internal stance and we've got the external stance. So the internal stance is very much about our ethos within the organisation of acceptance and support. We are an inclusive organisation. So a cisgendered woman and a woman with a trans history, they can both use the ladies' toilets. It's not an issue. And the same applies to all men, whether they are cisgendered men or men with a trans history. Any toilet in the estate, it's not an issue. That isn't policied, but that will be part of the transitioning at work policy. Outside, you have to understand that we are not a political organisation. So when it comes to the viewpoint, the perspective, is it right? Is it wrong? Which side of the argument might we as an organisation fall down on? We won't, because we are completely impartial. But if our officers go to an incident whereby a cisgendered woman has a debate with a transgendered woman, with the woman with a trans history, because over the use of a gendered bathroom, provided that hasn't become a heated debate, provided there's no breach of the peace, provided it is just an exchange of views, we will do what we always do. We'll go and we'll listen to people and we'll make sure that there isn't a breach of the peace. If it transpires that there's going to be some kind of public order incident, we'll intervene to make sure that that doesn't become anything it doesn't need to be. And if we find that somebody has gone from expressing an opinion into perpetrating some kind of hate offence, well, obviously we'll take affirmative action.
Thanks for that. Sorry, I'm just checking the chat to see if there was any. I think there's a bit of chat there saying, "What's the canteen culture like?" I think the banter in the police force, but I think we've probably covered that in the first couple of questions, I guess. I'm not sure if we want to share the banter of the police canteen, I'll be honest. Okay, then we've got 6-7 minutes left. Jo, just open it to you. You're the guest of honour, if you like, along with Shiv. Is there anything you want to add on while you've got the opportunity to talk to the group before we sort of round it up?
Yeah, I mean, just invite comments and views from people in terms of anything we've said tonight, or if you had experience of us as an organisation, and then probably just to add before we do open it up, it's always good to put a shout out in a couple of weeks' time. No, next week actually, 16th, we will open up for recruitment for police constables again, and invite people if they're interested. We do lots of information events around it, and if you know people who are keen to join, then you can make contact, obviously, with Benji, with Shiv, but really keen to promote the organisation. Anybody joining as a police constable now joins and works through a 3-year degree, so it's a mix of university based study with Northumbria University. We're partnered with Northumbria to deliver, and workplace experience, and that's the 3-year degree course. If somebody's already got a degree, then they go on a 2-year diploma, again linked in with Northumbria University. So the offer, if you like, from policing is very, very different, probably from when Shiv and I joined the organisation. But the approach is around sort of raising the professionalism of the organisation. So that was just a bit of a shout out in terms of people considering joining. We have additional places for officers because this government increased the number of police officers nationally by 20,000, so we have our 1% chunk of that 20,000, but it's a positive thing.
Andy, do you want to ask something?
It was more some observational comments than anything. Firstly, just before we run out of time, Jo, I'm just reminded that just over a week ago was the anniversary of the Stonewall riots, which were actually obviously American-based. But one of the things I'm quite taken with is the history of LGBT community in the police, and I think I just need to point out how fantastic this is, what we're doing now, and this would never have happened when perhaps yourself and Shiv joined the force. So on the back of that, one, that is truly amazing. Secondly, just thank you for actually giving up so much of your valuable time to come along.
You're welcome.
I really do appreciate it. And obviously thank you to Andrew as well for sort of, I was going to say herding the sheep, but I don't think that's really the phrase I mean. But thank you, Andrew, for sort of directing that. And there's an open invitation for you both to come back anytime, bring cookies and bring that spare 10 million that you found down the back of your couch. Because if you can't spend it, I'm pretty sure Arcus can. I'm looking at my colleague who's also got her hands raised. One of the things we've done in the past with the fire service is actually help them to write their transitioning at work policy. So I've got a bit of expertise in that, and I'm looking at my colleague Pips there, who's from what we call LGBT gods in Stonewall, and I'm pretty sure that the pair of us can more than happily come and give you some help with that. And of course, feel free to buy any of my training for your officers. It's good value for money. I'll throw over. Thank you at the end, Jo, but I'll throw back over to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Pips, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what. Hi, Jo. My name's Philippa Scrafton. I have a number of hats on around LGBT activism. I chair Darlington Unity Group. I'm the client account manager and senior programs officer for Stonewall here in the Northeast, and I've as well as chairing the race hate crime board. I think one of the things that I've been privileged to be able to do is work alongside your staff and officers over the, certainly for the, you know, the last 3 years, as when you were Stonewall Diversity Champions. And I think that drives this agenda forward, because it's really important. You mentioned austerity cuts, and we know what austerity cuts have done. I'm really conscious of time, so I'm going to try and speed up. I think what I'm really keen to see as we move forward is ensuring that, you know, we look at techniques within the organisation around making sure senior leaders understand what it is to be LGBT plus. As a trans activist myself, you know, I've experienced transphobia and hate, both physically and verbally. I did some work with David on cadets and stop and search. I sit on the bus panel with the Police and Crime Commissioner. I just think there's a lot more that we could be doing to understand the nuance. You know, the language that we talk about now is different to what it was 15 years ago. When we talked about transvestite, transsexual, we talked gender fluid, genderqueer, non-binary, and it's really important that that language is understood if we're hoping to engage with particularly trans and non-binary communities, where there is somewhat of a reluctance to have that support with officers or with any uniform service. And I think, you know, it's brilliant when you see that rainbow badge, and a member of the LGBT community who's facing isolation, or, you know, for the last 18 months, they may be in a hostile home, struggling with their gender identity or sexual orientation, and they're not in a position to be able to call that out or get that support. And, you know, as Andy said, we've worked very closely together for a long time, and this is a really fantastic opportunity. I've got a million questions, but, you know, I can ask them at various other meetings with Shiv and Andrew as well. But I would very much like the opportunity, if we could, to ask you some questions in another forum such as this in a future date.
Yeah, that's really, yeah, of course, that's really valuable. I think you've just highlighted, and it's a really good point in relation to, you know, us all being knowledgeable, us all, because nobody ever wants to offend anybody, do they? They go with good intention, but sometimes the language isn't always right. So really, really valuable in terms of educating us, so that we are, you know, as well informed as we can be, to support everyone and be, you know, be that legitimate and trusted part of a community.
Thanks for that. Echo those comments. I think we've come a long way, and I think if everybody, particularly because we're talking about the constabulary, if everybody has that attitude that every day is a school day and there's always something to learn, then we can't go far wrong, can we? Yeah. In terms of future questions in future forums, I'm not going to put any burden on anybody around the screen. What I'll say is we'll have conversations after we've finished and just see what we want to do in the, you know, the broad way, whether we do some questions online or email questions, or we do another forum, but we'll sort that out afterwards when everybody's finished watching football and making the dinner in my case.
Andrew, I was just going to say, I've got a sort of a document that outlines how we deal with hate crime. Okay. And that might be really beneficial for the whole group to digest at their leisure. I mean, I can't imagine it be, you know, a thrill for anybody, to really be honest, but you know, because there may be stuff in there you think, well, you know, I didn't even know that, so it might be beneficial. If I'll just send it over to you, Andrew, and Andy, and you can share it with the rest of the group.
Well, one of the good things in Darton is we do have Mr. Cullen, the team, who put the newsletter out weekly, and other people who share through the Unity group and all the rest of it. So anything like that, we can share widely. And if anybody does want to see it, they will get the chance. And that's one of the good things about this group. It does get the information back out there for anybody who wants it. So I'll just round up by saying we'll have that discussion afterwards. We'll share the documents and we'll discuss what the forums we want to get together over. But again, I'll reiterate everybody else around the screen and say thank you so much, Jo. Thank you so much, Shiv, and Benji as well, for committing your time outside of your normal hours, if you like. Although, again, Benji's on football wages, so it doesn't count. Thank you so much. It is very much appreciated, and we'll make sure that everything that comes out of this is shared with the wider community, not just the LGBT community, but the wider community as well, so they can hear some of those answers. And hopefully at some point we'll see you again, possibly even in a real room with like biscuits and stuff. We never know.
How old-fashioned.
So,
How old-fashioned.
thanks very much. And we'll all sign off and
Thank
see you all again.
Thanks all. Take care.
Everybody, lovely to see everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.